do that right? All right. This is my brother-in-law, Greg. I'm not sure what he's eating. When my wife and I decided to move back to Philadelphia, where we're from in the United States, we lived in Brooklyn for a while, we had kids, we decided to move back close to family. Our parents and both of our parents live pretty close to each other, so the opportunity for people who love to babysit our kids, we could still have date nights, we could still go out, that was too hard to pass up. So we bought this old church, and it needed a lot of work done to it. But we got it for pretty cheap. And my brother-in-law, Greg, he's the kind of guy who had a different job every summer. So one summer he would build pools, another summer he would work at a convenience store, another summer he would work retail, another summer he would do roofing. So he had kind of odd jobs every summer. He said, I'll make you a trade. I'll fix your house, I'll do the demolition, I'll put up new drywall, I'll do enough that you can move in if you teach me how to be a web developer. I was like, well, that's a pretty good trade, sure. So we made that trade, and he spent 9 months with me, and that was the first apprentice that I've ever had.
For me, it all started when I wanted to create a site for my band, and I reached out to Dan from SuperFriendly.
I've had jobs in every single field I can think of, from building houses, masonry, carpentry, to fast food restaurants, and everything was just not challenging. And so I finally, came to SuperFriendly to join the apprenticeship.
Starting out the apprenticeship, I was nervous. I didn't exactly know what I'll be doing. Whether it was like the cliche apprenticeship, going out to get coffee, or doing the small things. But I was actually surprised when Dan really put me in front of the computer and said, "Okay, we're going to learn." The projects that SuperFriendly takes on, it's diverse.
Big to small to really intricate to very simple things.
One thing you're going to learn is different techniques and approaches to design.
It was a really good process for me because it was how I wanted to learn. It wasn't how everybody else should learn.
I remember Dan saying, I'm going to teach you design, but you can also apply it to life. And that was really one of the big objectives throughout the apprenticeship.
From having nothing going for me, and then becoming successful within less than a year's time was unbelievable. The apprenticeship meant the world to me. It literally changed my life.
Greg wasn't joking, he wasn't exaggerating. It literally changed his life. Shortly after the apprenticeship, he proposed to his girlfriend, Carrie. They got married shortly thereafter on the beach. They bought a house and they got a cool dog named Zeta. This is Greg here. On his agency's website, he works for an agency in Philadelphia called Blue Cadet. He does museum installations and he do touchscreen apps and really great things like that. Most importantly, he got a haircut. Now, unfortunately, I think these kinds of stories are exceptions, right? We hear about these things, and we hear about people doing an amazing thing like learning where they work, right? Kind of a weird thing. You're like, wow, you learned where you work? That's kind of weird. And we marvel at this. But maybe we shouldn't marvel at this. In Wired magazine, David Edwards, he laments the typical American school system setup. Right? So he says, we learn, and then after this we do. We go to school, and then we go to work. This approach does not map very well to personal and professional success in America today. Learning and doing have become inseparable in the face of conditions that invite us to discover. And I think there's good reasons for that, right? Think about your jobs. Your boss, your clients, they may not want you to fail, right? They may not want you to do things where you actually mess up or where you flop. But there's this great chart. This comes from the Harvard Business Review. And this is a chart for the reasons, a spectrum of reasons for failure. So if you look at the very right side of the chart, that's the kind of failure we want to eliminate at our jobs, right? We don't want people to fail because they're inattentive, because they're deviant, right? We want to eliminate that stuff. That's about insubordination. That's about immaturity. But if you look at the left side of that spectrum, Those are the kinds of failure that we want at our jobs, right? The whole startup mantra of fail faster, fail often, and all of that kind of stuff. That's the kind of failure that we're talking about. We want people to fail because they're exploring, because they're generating hypotheses and testing whether or not they work. Those are the kinds of things that actually make for great employees, not the stuff on the right side. But what we've done in our workplace is we've said, well, we just wanted to try to eliminate all failure altogether, and that's actually not a productive thing. Right? And it goes all the way down to the way we hire. So here's an example. This is Vimeo's job application page. Right? Vimeo, they say, we're looking for extraordinary people to join our team. Right? They have language like extraordinary people. And that's cool, that's good. We should all be looking for extraordinary people to work with and to work for. But there's a subtext here. And the subtext is, you have to be really good before you get here. Right, we're not going to teach you anything here. You've got to be extraordinary before you get here. We're not going to help you to become extraordinary. That's not exclusive to Vimeo. I don't mean to pick on them. This is RGA, which is an agency based in New York. They have offices in London and Singapore and all around the world. And this is their job application for a producer. And it's loaded with language that says stuff like, has to have solid experience and high quality. You have to be incredibly organized and strong communication skills. You have to be used to being on the go. Again, the same subtext. You got to be really, really good before you get here. Walmart, in some of their job applications. So this is a job application for a senior director of creative and content at samsclub.com, loaded with phrases like manages, inspires, directs, improve efficiency and quality, supervises, champions, highly skilled, engaged workforce, maximize the achievements. Again, same subtext. Got to be really good before you get here, because you're not going to get that here. Now, that may not be true, but that's what these kinds of applications, that's what these kinds of things say. So you got to be really good before you get here. And for good reason, right? Think of a job application like this. This probably wouldn't go over well. We're looking for a designer that's a bit of an underachiever, someone fairly average, no skills required. Don't worry about being a self-starter. If you can follow orders, well, that's good enough for us. Probably wouldn't go over well. Or would it? I'm going to share some stats about the American economy and about jobs in America. I'm not sure how well they translate, but I would imagine that a lot of different societies have similar things that are coming up. So here's some examples. The Economic Policy Institute reported that last year, 40,000 Americans graduate with a bachelor's degree in computer science every year. So that's true as of, I believe, 2014. Another statistic is that 1 million programming jobs in the US will go unfilled by the year 2020. And that comes from the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. It comes from their census. One other fact is that there's about 8 million people that are unemployed in the United States. Those are all staggering statistics on their own, but if you put them all together, it's even more shocking. So take a look at this. On the spectrum of skills, right, let's say on the left there you've got a spectrum of skills, and we start with people with mad skills at the very top, and people at the bottom with no skills. Yeah, I'm from the US. I'm from Philly. That's how we talk. What you see is the people that we work with and we hire, and this represents us, we're sort of this green area, right? These are the computer science graduates. These are people that go to school for what we do, design, development, engineering, right? And we come out of school with certain skills that place us on the top end of that, right? We have good skills. If you mix into that people like us that have been doing what we've been doing for a long time, we have kind of this area. And this is generally where people like us and our employers and our organizations and our startup, we like to hire from this pool. Right? There's a few of us, and we can move around from job to job. So what you see is this plot just moving around, just shifting and moving. But if you balance that with the US statistic of 8 million jobs here, and this is not drawn to scale, 8 million unemployed, compared to the small amount of people that actually graduate with skills, it's drastically different. It's staggering even. And this is not drawn to scale. This is, in order for me to draw this to scale, you would have one gray dot at the top would be represented by 800 green dots at the bottom. So I wouldn't even be able to show this on a slide. And so what we do is we at the top, we kind of shuffle around and shuffle around and shuffle around as much as we can. And as we get better, as we get more skills, as we stay at our jobs, we get promotions, we go to conferences like this, we level up our skills and we get better and better. And everybody at that top range moves up. And what that means is this plot below, there is a widening gap in between these two areas. I believe that there's a solution to this, and I think that that solution is the apprenticeship. I think it's different than the internship, and I'll try to explain what the differences are. And I'll try to, by the end of this talk, I'm going to try to convince you that maybe it's worthwhile for you to take on an apprentice. Even if you're not a master at what you do, that's okay. I want to try and convince you that maybe you could try and take on an apprentice, or maybe you can convince your employer or a friend or a co-working space to try out an apprenticeship program. So what is apprenticeship? Just so we're on the same page. Well, Wikipedia says, an apprenticeship is a system of training a new generation of practitioners of a trade or profession with on-the-job training and often some accompanying study. All right, so nothing too mind-blowing. There's probably what you would have guessed even if you hadn't known the definition. So let's look a little bit at the history of apprenticeship. So if you think about in medieval times, an 8-year-old, a parent would have an 8-year-old boy or girl, and they would send that 8-year-old off to apprentice with a craftsperson. So imagine some of you that have kids. Anybody have 8-year-olds out there? All right, you kick little Johnny out the door. Right? You're going to go live with that blacksmith for 8 years. Right? Gone. They're no longer your kid. They go and apprentice for this blacksmith. And they learn the trade. They learn the trade of blacksmithing. But what's different is that they also learn the profession of blacksmithing. And that's different than our internships now. Right? A lot of our internships are about learning trade. We can take on interns and teach them HTML and CSS and design and UI and UX and all that kind of stuff. But rarely do those people learn the profession, how to be a professional. And that's one of the biggest differences between an apprenticeship and an internship. An apprenticeship is holistic. It's deep, while an internship is sort of shallow and skims the surface. Right? So little Johnny goes to apprentice with this blacksmith, and he learns how to be a blacksmith, how to make metal, and how to work with metal, and how to melt it, and how to mold it. But he also learns what to charge a customer, and how to interact with that customer, and how to sell your service, and how to advertise for that service. He learns the profession of blacksmithing. All right, so after that, they apprentice for about 8 years. And then, once you're ready, your master basically says, all right, you're ready to go around and practice your trade. So you become a journeyman. And you travel from blacksmith to blacksmith. You learn different techniques from different blacksmiths. You go around and you do blacksmithing work for a period of time until you feel like you've got it under your belt. And then what you do is you make a master work and you submit it to the Guild of Blacksmiths. Right? So there's this guild of people. They look at your work, very similar to kind of like a master's project at a university or college. So if you're doing your master's, it's kind of the same way. So you're a journeyman. You submit your final work to this Guild of Blacksmiths. They say, yeah, this looks really great. This is high quality. You are now a master blacksmith. You are now ready to take on your own apprentice, and the cycle begins again. We don't have something like that too much in what we do in web design and web development and app design and engineering. But I believe that it could be very useful for us. Now, this is something that's not new. I didn't make this up, right? This has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it exists still in many other professions. So as an example, a lot of tattoo artists get their start by apprenticing, right? They go and they work with another tattoo artist, and they learn and they become professionals, and then they maybe go on and start their own tattoo shop. Right, this is a book called Inked about how to become a tattoo artist, and a lot of it covers what the apprenticeship model looks like for tattoo artists. Cooking. A lot of chefs become chefs by apprenticing under a chef. And as they gain skills, sort of have that same model where they gain their skills, they travel around, become a journeyman, and work in restaurant, and then maybe eventually open up their own restaurant where they take on sous chefs and others that they can apprentice. In architecture, this is very common. Frank Lloyd Wright, he had apprentices, and he regularly documented his letters to them in this book called Letters to Apprentices, and he had many volumes of this. So you can actually read some of the correspondence that he had with his apprentices. Some of his apprentices that live now still consider themselves his apprentices, even though they are very successful architects. Martin Luther, the famous theologian and reformist, he had many apprentices, and he actually documented some of his conversations. So what they would do is he would apprentice them during the day, and they'd live with him, and then at night they would just have conversations over dinner. He talked to them about everything. He talked about food and business and life and love and religion and God and the world and all sorts of stuff, and he recorded those conversations in this book called Table Talk that he had with his apprentices, just about life, right? About the business of what they do, but just about them being better humans. And that's one of the biggest differences between the internship and the apprenticeship, is that in the apprenticeship, he's also helping to develop them as humans. One of my favorite passages from this book. He says, almost every night when I wake up, the devil is there and he wants to dispute with me. I have come to this conclusion. When the argument that the Christian is without the law and above the law doesn't help, I instantly chase him away with a fart. My kids love that joke. So did you like that joke? Let me tell you a little bit about the SuperFriendly Apprenticeship. It's a 9-month apprenticeship, which is generally longer than a lot of the internships and apprenticeships that you hear about. And the reason for that is because of some of the things that I've already mentioned. It's hard to develop somebody in 12 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 weeks. It's hard to make them a professional. It's easy to teach them the skills, easy to teach the trade. That's why an internship is fine, and it can be shallow, because within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you can point somebody at a lynda.com course or a Treehouse course, throw a couple books at them, give them a couple of exercises, and they can become dangerous enough with HTML and CSS that they can go and develop on their own. But to make them a professional, it's a lot tougher to do in a condensed time frame. What I found is that within 9 months, you're barely scratching the surface. So for a 9-month apprenticeship, the end goal of that, as I work with people who have no skills in development, design, they usually come from other professions, like I mentioned with Greg, construction, retail, convenience stores, like things like that. So getting them up to speed takes its own amount of time. So the first 3 months of the apprenticeship is really about basic training. So the first day, whenever they get in, I ask them to choose a track. Some do, some don't. Some say, I'm interested in design, I think, or I'm interested in coding, I think, but they don't really know what that means. So it's more of a hesitant, like, I think it's this, but can I change this later if I decide to? So keep it pretty loose. And the first 3 months are just about basic training. How do we get you the basic skills that you need? So the first day, we talk about all the stuff that Jeremy talked about this morning. How does the internet work? What are all the wires that are buried under the ocean, and how does that actually work? What's a URL? What's a protocol? Does FTP and HTTP mean the same thing? Right? We talk about all of that kind of stuff. How does this work? What is a web browser? What happened? Oh, it downloads HTML. Oh, I can learn to write HTML. Oh, this is a tag? Right? So we talk about that over the first couple of days. For a developer apprentice, we talk about here's what an HTML tag looks like, and here's what a CSS property or selector or the anatomy of writing CSS looks like. For a designer, we go through tools. We go through Photoshop and Sketch, and we go through the toolbar one by one. This is called a toolbar. This is called the properties inspector. These are your panels. This is called a menu. And we talk about those because you have to have proficiency with the tools in order to be a professional. And those first 3 months are just about gaining proficiency. So you fight the tools, right? How many of you, when you learn a new technology, you just fight it for a while, right? You just battle it until you get fluent in it, and then you can use it, you can wield it to your will. But the first 3 months for an apprentice is just about how do I fight the tools, how do I get accustomed to this? Then at the end of those 3 months, you're proficient enough that I could probably put you on a project. So generally the next 3 months, 3 through 6, I put them on project work. And it starts very, very small. It starts as you're in charge of this one piece of the site. So a good first example of a first project is your job is the footer. You're just in charge of the footer. Maybe you got to code the footer of the site, or maybe you have to design the footer of the site, and that's it. Right? A small assignment. And I treat them like contractors too. So I hire them for these projects. In the previous 3 months, I don't pay them. I believe that pay comes from value. If you're not providing any value, you shouldn't get paid. If you're providing a lot of value, you should get a lot of money. Right? I think that's the way that it should work in business, and that's the way that I train my apprentices as well. So as you start to provide value, if you can build the footer for me, that means I don't have to build it. I'm happy to pay you for that. The more that you provide value, the more you get paid. So I ask them to estimate. That's part of the professional part. So you're in charge of the footer. What will you charge me for the footer? And this might be the first time they've ever charged for a professional service. So they'll think about it for a while, and they go, $25. $25 is too low. But we talk about why, and I'll tell them. I think that's too low. Here's why I think that. Maybe you didn't estimate well enough. How much time did you think this would take? How much does you think this gives work to me versus taking away work from me? Right? So we talk about those things. So then they think about it a little bit more, and they come back and they go, got it, $6,000. $6,000 isn't right for the footer either. And we talk about that too. And so just the way that they're honing their skills in design and development and coding and tools, they're also honing what it means to be a professional, because those are some of the things that they're going to have to contend with at some point. Some of my apprentices go on to freelance afterwards. Some of them go and start with companies. And the same skills that it takes you to negotiate a salary as the same skills that it takes you to write a contract for a client. So those skills are useful, and they're also scalable. All right, after those 6 months, the 3 to 6 months, the last 3 months are about Journeyman Prep. So I don't hire anybody full-time. They know that at the end of 9 months, they're not going to get a full-time job at SuperFriendly. So instead, what they're going to do is they're going to go and get a job wherever they want to. And I'll help them do that. So we write resumes together. We put together portfolios. We talk about who your dream candidates are, who your dream clients are, where you're going to apply, what kind of portfolio you need to put together in order to apply to that place, right? Certain agencies or certain startups or products, they need different things out of a portfolio. So one of the things, I have an apprentice right now who's actually working on this, and he's making 3 different portfolios because he's applying to 3 different places, right? And if you think about it, you're like, wow, 3 different portfolios, that seems like a lot of work. But imagine, if one of those portfolios lands you a $60,000 a year job, it's worth all the work that you put into it, right? So he's working on 3 different portfolios right now. We do interview prep. We talk about what an interview might look like. We talk about salary negotiations. We talk about all of that stuff. And eventually, at the end of that 9 months, some of these apprentices go on and get jobs. Not all of them, right? Certainly not 100% success rate, but a lot of them tend to. As an example, so here are a couple of some apprentices that have moved on after the apprenticeship program. So Sherelle was a substitute teacher before she started the apprenticeship. She worked at an Apple store before, and then she was interested in technology, and now she's a freelance designer, so she's doing branding work for startups and local organizations in Philadelphia. Coral used to work at the airport as a translator. And now she's actually a freelance photographer. So something that was interesting there is she did an apprenticeship in design and actually ended up as a photographer. You know, she took some of those design skills to actually have a very different job, and that's totally fine for the way that an apprenticeship should work out. She took those same skills and was able to scale them somewhere else. Josh went from a radio broadcast assistant, he's working at a radio station, to being an interactive designer. He freelanced for a couple of years afterwards. He got a full-time job at an agency, and now he's actually working at Comcast, making digital experiences for your TV. So those are just some examples of where you can start and where you can end. Okay, so how do I convince you to kind of take on an apprentice? Why should you apprentice? What's in it for you? What's in it for your company? So I hope to make that a little bit compelling. So the first one, I think it's maybe the most obvious one, is that you expand your talent pool, right? If you're trying to hire, how many people work at companies that are trying to hire? How many of you have posted something on the job board out there? Oh, all the hands go down. Shame on you. Go post some stuff on the job board out there. All right. If you're trying to hire, it's hard to hire from that top pool. It's really hard because all of those people are probably getting good offers from other companies. Instead, expand your job pool, right? All of these are people that you can hire. Now, certainly, those people don't have the skills that the people at the top do, but that could be on you. That's something that's within your control. You can take that person, and you can say, I'm going to pour 9 months of effort into them, or 6 months, or 12 weeks, or whatever you want to, in order to get them to a place eventually where they can be effective for us, versus throwing a ton of money at the people at the top, because that's really the only thing that you can do to entice them. So the most obvious reason is if you look in different places, it can actually help you to hire. Okay, so that's reason number one. Right? So think about this person right here. You're trying to hire that person. Maybe that person is a fairly senior designer. Let's just look at the numbers. I'm going to use some US-based salaries, but kind of translate this as you will to your economy. So a standard salary for a fairly senior designer across the US is about $80,000 a year. Okay? So that person, maybe that person's making $70,000 a year now. You offer them a job and you say, we'll be happy to pay you $80,000. Well, great. The next year, right, an annual raise is generally about 5% at the most, 1 to 5%. So let's say you give that person who is a stellar person a 5% raise. At the end of year 2, you're paying them $84,000, right? That $4,000 as that raise that you got them that year. So if you look at that in total, over 2 years, you've paid that person $164,000. Okay, year 3, you are paying that person, and on average, a lot of people in this industry jump from job to job about every 2.5 years, at least in the US. So halfway through the 3rd year, this person bails, they go and get another job at somewhere else because they're being heavily recruited. Remember, that talent pool is shallow. So that person's being heavily recruited. So they jump ship, they go to another place, and now, so you've only paid $42,000 to them that year, but now you've got another job search ahead of you. Right? So over those 3 years, you've paid $206,000 as an organization, and now you still have to look for a person. Right? You're still short that person. Well, let's look at the numbers about hiring an apprentice. You could probably hire an apprentice, especially someone who comes from not this trade. Right? Maybe they come from doing something different. If you can promise them $40,000 a year, that's a great starting salary for a junior designer. That's a great starting salary, $40,000 a year. The second year, you give them that 5% annual raise at $2,000. You get them to $42,000. The third year, okay, so in total, you've paid them $82,000. The third year, you've given them another 5% raise. That gets them to $44,100 a year. But the likelihood that that person is going to stay with you is much greater than the other person that you poached from somewhere else at a senior level. This person, you've given them a chance, you've poured your effort into them, and that breeds loyalty. Right? It's not a given formula. It's not guaranteed to work every time, but it is a pretty sure bet. Right? That person, the people who grow up with an agency tend to be there for a long time. Certainly there are exceptions, but I think that's a good thing that you can bank on. Now, over all of that time, you've got a loyal employee. They know your work, they know your workflow, they know the clients, they know how to do it. They've stuck with you. They're there to help you grow. You've invested in them, so you're actually invested in them. And you've only spent $126,000 on them versus at the same point $206,000. You've saved almost $80,000, and the savings just increase every year. They accrue. All right, so maybe money is not the thing that convinces you. A lot of the hesitation that I get from people that are saying, wow, I can't believe you take on apprentices. That must take a lot of time. Well, let's look at the time that it actually takes. Just shout it out as a guess. In a 9-month apprenticeship, how much time do you think I spend training my apprentices? I log my time, I use Harvest. How much time do you think? Like, name it in weeks or hours or whatever. Just shout it out. What do you think? 3%. Well, try hours or weeks or something like that. 3 weeks. Anybody else? 3 months? 1 month? Anybody else? 10 hours a week. All great guesses. When I looked back at my Harvest data, on average across the 10 apprentices that I've had, I spent 35 hours over 9 months. Right? That seems like an accounting error. Right? Like 35 hours, that's barely a week. To break it down, it's 4 hours a month, an hour a week, 12 minutes a day. And that's actually pretty accurate, right? So if you think about the first day, I worked for a boss who said this thing to me on my first day. He's like, do you have kids? I was like, and I didn't have kids at the time. He's like, all right, well, I have kids. He's like, running an agency is kind of like having kids. The first day, the day that they're born, the day that they start, they need you the most. That's the most they will ever need you. Every minute that goes on, they need you less and less. I was like, man, that's so depressing. But it's true about the apprenticeship too. The first day that they start is when they will need you the most. The more skills they learn, the more that they grow, they need you less and less. So the first day I spend 6 hours with them, right? A big chunk of that is actually in the first day. We talk about the internet, we talk about how it works. The second day, we do a 3-hour lecture on here's how you write HTML. But then they have a week of practicing, right? Writing code, doing stuff on their own, doing research, reading books. That's time I don't need to spend with them. If they have questions, always there to answer those questions. But one of the answers that I tend to give is when somebody asks a question that I know that they can actually research, my answer is, good luck. So they say, hey, Dan, what attribute do I put on there? I say, good luck. Right? That's an easy Google search away. And one of the skills that they have to develop is, when I don't know something, how do I learn to learn that? And so if I know it's a thing that they can find, maybe I'll point them in the right direction, but that takes 30 seconds, right? That's not time that I need to log. And then as they get more skills, they need you less and less. At the end of most people's apprenticeships, we're going weeks at a time where they go, hey, I'm going to build this. I'm going to do it with React. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to have it progressively enhanced, but I'm going to design it first, and then I'll probably show you that thing in the first couple of days just so make sure you're in the right direction. Right? They tell me their whole plan, and all I have to say is like, yeah, sounds good. Right? That's how you know that people are growing. And the first day, you have to tell them exactly what to do. Do this, write this code, open this code editor, make it this many lines, document it this way, and then they say, okay. At the end, it flips. Right? At the end, they come back to me and they say that stuff. I'm like, cool, sounds good. So it's not a lot of time. And what about money? Over the course of an apprenticeship, I treat these apprentices like contractors. I've spent about $7,000 on average with each of them. Right, that's paying them for the work that they've done. Some apprentices have made a lot more. I think the most I've ever paid an apprentice is $16,000 over the apprenticeship. And the least I've paid is probably about $1,500. And that $1,500 was to someone who wasn't really doing their work. So I didn't feel like I could trust them on a project. Right? The same is true for an apprentice as it is for an employee. If you can't trust them, don't put them on the work. Let them grow more until you do that. Pour more into them until you can do that. So over the course of an apprenticeship, on average, $7,000. Now, that's not a small amount of money, but it's also not a large amount of money, too. One of the things that I do ask my apprentices is I say, you're going to have to save up, because this is going to be boot camp for a while. And you're going to be able to get paid, but you're not going to be able to get paid to live. So this is an investment that you're going to make, too. You make an investment. Maybe that means you got to save money for a couple of years. Maybe that means you got to take out a bank loan. Maybe that means you got to sell your car. But if this is the investment that you're making, I'll match that investment with the effort that I'll pour in you. And that makes for a good apprenticeship. It's investment both ways. So monetarily, I've paid about $7,000. Here's what it breaks down to. It's about $1,100 a month. It's about $200 a week, $300 a week. It's about $58 a day. It's about $7 an hour. Now, think about this from the apprentice standpoint. They could get paid $7 an hour at Burger King, right, working food service, flipping burgers, giving fries to people, or they can get paid $7 an hour learning a trade, learning a profession that will treat them well for the rest of their lives, that will set them up to do whatever they want, get married, buy a house, get a dog, get a haircut. Another great thing about apprenticing, if you expand this talent pool, when you look at the top part, those people, they all look and think and talk and sound like us. The people at the bottom don't. Diversity is a great, great thing, and one that's missing in our industry, honestly. A way to solve that problem is to look elsewhere. It's to choose from a different pool. If you want the statistics to back that up, here you go. McKinsey & Company published a study called Why Diversity Matters. So if you want the bottom line for how diversity can impact your bottom line, haha, see what I did there? Gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry means. More impressively, racially and ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry means. So diversity isn't just a nice thing to have. It's not just so you can say, hey, we're diverse, check that out, it's cool. It actually is valuable to your organization. It impacts your bottom line, it gets you different points of view, and a way to do that is just to look elsewhere in how you're hiring. And what it takes is investment from you. You can invest money by throwing money at a person, and that's actually a poor investment. Or you can invest a little bit of your effort, share a little bit of what you know, and grow somebody. It acts like a springboard. All right, so like I said, apprenticeships aren't a thing that I've invented. You know, they're certainly a well-established way of training people, and SuperFriendly is not the only one that's doing apprenticeships. There are a lot of apprenticeships programs. I'll share a couple in the US. I don't know much about what's going on in Europe, but I would imagine that there are some that are here. There's a great, great apprenticeship at a place called The Nerdery in the US. It's run by a guy named Fred Beecher. What's cool about Fred and about The Nerdery is that his job is to run the apprenticeship. Right? That is his job. It's not like he's a UX designer and like on the side he has some apprentices. They have said, we are going to invest the money to have you run the apprenticeship. That's a really great model for how this works. Think of it as similar to an R&D lab. A lot of your agencies or a lot of your product teams that you work on, you might have a budget that's devoted to R&D, right? Where you're just tinkering with whatever, physical computing or Internet of Things or whatever. Treat an apprenticeship the same way. Devote a budget to it and say, all right, we're going to carve out a space and maybe even a person to be able to focus their time and their energy and their interest in this. Right? So that's one way you could do it, model it after The Nerdery. Fresh Chilled Soil in the U.S. has a great 15-week apprenticeship. It's called the AUX apprenticeship. It's the apprenticeship for UX folks. And they create UX designers in these 15-week boot camps. Now, they can do it in 15 weeks because it's very, very intensive. It is very difficult, but they come out with really great apprentices. Sparkbox in Dayton, Ohio in the US. They have a 6-month apprenticeship, and they're doing amazing things. Their apprenticeship sites are all built by their apprentices. If you're curious about it, you can go to apprentices.at, and you'll see all the great things that they're doing. Thoughtbot has a really great apprenticeship too. They have a 3-month apprenticeship. They're one of the ones that have started that very, very early on, and so they have a great apprenticeship program there too. Huge, who's based in New York, they have offices in London and all around the world as well. They have a 12-week UX school where they sort of pick the best and the brightest to really accelerate their education and turn them into full-time employees. So this is something that's happening everywhere. It's not something that's happening just in one place, and I encourage you to kind of think about what it would look like at your organizations. So far, all of the apprenticeships for the SuperFriendly Academy have been word of mouth. Very recently, a few months ago, I opened it up to the public. If you have somebody that wants to move to Philadelphia or wants to move to the US, somebody that you know that has no skills in technology or in design or engineering, please forward them my way. Send them to the site. The site is superfriend.ly/academy. I would love to hear from them. And also for all of you, because you are all overqualified to apply for that, but if you're interested in starting an apprenticeship, one of the things that I'm working on, it's not finished yet, but I'm working on codifying what a curriculum looks like. So it's not very rigid because it's pretty open for each apprentice. But if you're interested and you want sort of a starter kit, I'd be happy to share what I've learned. I'm curious to know what you've all learned if you've ever tried this before. So please send me an email. I would love to kind of trade notes about this stuff. Grazie.